over the project sheet for assignment 6, which is watercolor basics and textures. And you know, the goal is on this to demonstrate 6 basic watercolor techniques and experiment with 6 different textures. So when I've done that in a video, which I'll link at the end here, but review the project sheet right here and then watch the video fully. I've demoed the whole thing, and then get, you know, 1 or 2 watercolor sheets and create 12 3x3-inch squares. Don't make them smaller, make them exactly 3x3. That's a large area, and I'd like you to show me that you can do this, okay? And then fill each square with the so 1 square of solid wash, 1 square of a gradient color to nothing, the third square a color to color, the 4th one wet on wet technique, 5th dry on dry, wet on dry. So go through these and yeah, upload it to a portfolio, and then the URL to Canvas. It's due the 17th, and yeah, that's it. So follow the demo. I mean, you could work right along. I've done some extra techniques, so you're welcome to look at those. Like one includes watercolor pencils. You do not need to go buy those. One includes like an alcohol drip. You don't have to get that. You could do a water drip. And then the stop out or masking fluid, you do not have to do that one either. So I've tried to narrow it down so you can just do things that are accessible to you. Okay, so hope you enjoy this and learn some more about watercolor. Okay, hi. This is Chad. I wanted to go over some watercolor tips with you, and not only tips, but this is kind of a demo of an assignment. So you can see I have my paper. It's 11 by 15. I've divided it up into 12 squares, and so I'm just gonna start off with we're gonna just kind of talk about how to I guess just do some basic things in watercolor. Okay, so let me get my brushes out. Okay, and I'm gonna get my water out as well. Okay, and then I'm gonna just have a sponge up here that I will be daubing my brush onto. Which is actually already in my palette. That's a nice little travel. Now you can have a rag or whatever works best for you. So this first one up here, I am going to, let me just move over a bit so you can kind of see what's going on. This first one is going to be a solid wash right here. And I'm just checking my camera to see if you can see everything. Okay, so solid wash. Let's get a little more light on stuff if I can. Okay, so to do an absolutely solid wash, I found you wet the area that you want the solid wash on. This will help, this kind of helps the pigments disperse really, really nicely over the entire area. And there's different stages of wetness on watercolor paper. Right when I put it on, the paper is still pretty shiny, but as I let it sit there, it gets dull. And it's just nice to be aware of where your paper is at. This wash will work pretty well on either one, but it works better on the dull one, at least in my experience. So I'm just going to throw, I guess I'm just picking a color at this point, right? Yeah, let's just put now this is not an easy pigment, this burnt sienna, at least and I'm mixing it with some Payne's Gray, it looks like. That's okay. One thing about a wash, you need to make sure you get enough of it, right, to cover a 3x3 area. So I think this is going to be enough, at least with the brush size that I have. So I'm going to start at the top and lay down a wash. Then I'll get some more, load my brush up again, and I'll do a stroke underneath it. And I'm not letting it dry is the trick here. Once you let it dry, you're going to have like lines and goofy things, blooms, and it'll really kind of mess up your solid wash, and that's what we're going for here, is a solid wash. So this wet paper also helps to keep it from the wash from drying up. So not only does it distribute the pigments and things really nicely, but it also, yeah, keeps. So this is just a solid wash of one solid color. So I'm going to let that dry. You can see where I left off here. It was a little bit lighter where I brushed my pencil or my brush through. It was lighter, and then it just kind of like filled in because of the wetness of it. Now you can see it's a little dark over here. I'm going to dry my brush and just kind of pull up a little bit. So the brush can act like a sponge, or it can remove or take. And right there I just took, but I put it down on the rest of it. Okay, so that's a solid wash. My next thing is I'm going to do a wash from a color to nothing. Okay, so what I'll do on this one, and there's a few ways to do it. This time I won't wet it wet it beforehand. So I'm going to pick a new color here. Okay, it's kind of a lovely kind of purple. Okay, so it's dry, so I'm painting wet on dry. So I'm going to do a wash across. Now it's important especially if you're doing wet on dry, to know that it's gonna dry sooner than the wet on wet. So what I've done here is I'm dipping a little bit into the water, brushing it off, and then coming back into my wash and making a stroke across, and then dipping into the brush, wiping off. And this is a very slow way of making this gradation. But you can see it getting lighter. And if I'm pretty aware of the size of, now I'll just dip in a little bit less and a little bit less each time. So I'm kind of making sure that my brush is pretty full of water. And this last time I'm going to do mostly water or all water. And what I could do is, if I wanted this to fade to nothing, I could get a very dry brush. So here I'm taking all the moisture out of from my sponge, and then I can just pull across the bottom, and it will take a lot of that moisture out. Okay, gradient. Okay, and because of the paper, the cotton paper and everything, it's going to make it really smooth. All right, next thing we want to do is gradient from one color to another. So gonna find some color. I think this one looks great right here, why not? And I might go kind of make a gradation into this yellow, okay? And I might go left to right, just so, because my board is tilted a little bit, and if I wash top to bottom, it's gonna push everything from the top down. So there's a couple ways to do this. I'll do it the easy way, and that's just load up one side of your wash area. I'm not sure what's going on right there with pigment, and while it's all wet, I'm going to go grab my other pigment and load up the other side. And I may need to mix. And this is the worry right here, is you want to make sure you get a full pigment over here, so you don't have to spend time mixing, and which makes everything dry up, which you really don't want. Okay, so here's the next bit we can do, is just load our brush full of water and then go in between, and then rely on the water to help mix it. Now, what the worry with this issue, with put a bunch of water in here, is that it kind of pushes out the pigments. You can see it's doing that here. The water is kind of establishing, and I might come in and fix it, because I don't want it to do that. The water will push, whatever has the most water is going to push things around. I don't know if you really realize that about watercolor, but if whatever has the largest amount of water, generally, as a rule, will push the other colors around and flow into them. So now I have a little bit better, pulling out some. And I could mix a little bit of half and half here, half one pigment, half yellow, and then just use that to kind of mesh them together. And you can see what happened here, that dried a bit. See that line that happened? Try to just repaint that. Okay. Well, we'll see how that goes. So that's between two pigments, a gradient between two pigments. The next thing I wanted to do was talk about wet on wet and wet on dry. Okay, so wet on wet is, and I'm going to change brushes here so I can quickly lay down a wash. So I'm just getting a 1-inch synthetic, and I'm going to put some type of a wash down. Actually, let me just get some of this sap green. Actually, no, let's do a blue. Sorry. I'm gonna get some cerulean, and yeah, I've mixed it with what's there. That's okay. So I'm just gonna do a wash over this whole 3-inch square. Okay. One thing nice about the big brushes is that you could lay down a big mean, you can just, you don't have to do this line after line technique if your brush is giant, okay? Because it can lay down a whole area very, very quickly. And 1 inch on a 3 inch, that's a big brush. That's great. So let me just mention this. Right now, the washes that I just did is very shiny. I'm going to come in with a very dark green. And I'm going to just show you what very shiny looks like if I put a wet into wet. So this thing is still wet. So as as everything is still wet, I'm going to, you know, just put some marks in here just to see what happens, how much they disperse. And then I'm going to wait till it gets not shiny on this top half and do the same thing. So it is getting less and less shiny, so I have to wait just a little bit more. And we'll see. Sorry if I'm blocking the camera, I apologize for that. But the wetter the initial wash is, the more that's going to disperse. This is still pretty shiny up here, but there's parts of it that are getting dry. So I'm going to just go in with my, maybe I have too much on it. Okay. So this is kind of wet on wet. So one really interesting thing about using, I'll just maybe continue on this. If things are still wet, if you have a wash that's still wet, you can totally change and add colors to it. And it will not be an issue. In other words, it won't dry with like goofy lines on it. So wet on wet, I'll do that again with a different color still. And yeah, we can get muddy. Things can get a little bit, you know, it's going to mix on the page. This is pretty wet, but now it's not shiny anymore. So I'm going to try going in with this initial green that I used. And we can see how that works when it's not shiny. So here we have super shiny. It really spreads out. This is semi, and this is semi glossy, and this is not glossy in here. Okay. So now we'll just do dry on, or sorry, wet on dry. So I'm just gonna paint right on this square with a okay. So I did some wet on dry. And then I made another wash, and I'll come back and do this again right on top of it, but this wash was pretty important because I'm going to show you about lifting. Different papers are better at lifting than others, I've found. So you'll have to test and see which. So that's not fully dry, but this one is. So that's pretty close. So I'm going to do some more dry or wet on dry technique here. I think I need to do that one again. I'll just use okay. So wet on dry is just painting with wet watercolor on dry paper. And you get very sharp edges. See how sharp this is? And you can also do like dry brush techniques. okay, where you leave little white windows of paper essentially. But yeah, the thing to kind of take away is that you can do very sharp lines with this, and sharp edges. I guess that's kind of, that's what I guess one thing I want you to kind of understand is that you can do sharp edges on this wet on dry. Okay, lifting. Let me just get a different brush. Lifting can kind of mess up brushes a little bit if you do it a lot. If you do a little bit here and there, it's not a big deal. But generally I get just a semi-damp brush, and then I'll pick an area and just kind of scrub a little bit, and it does lift off pretty nicely now. Okay, so yeah, I was just talking about lifting, semi-damp brush, and just running it over it a few times can do some damage. You put a little bit of water on it and then daub it, and you'll get some lifting. If you want to lift, like do some serious lifting, then you'll want to get a big brush and do some super scrubbing. Watercolor doesn't come up all that well unless you prepare for it to come up. So this is actually coming up really nicely. Let me mention that the papers are gonna make it easy or hard, and also the paint. There is staining paint and there is non-staining paint. So yeah, this is surprisingly lifting so well, and it's actually kind of nice to go in and lighten up an area with it just adds another dimension to painting, like another tool. But honestly, and again, depends on your paper. Some of the paper just does not lift well at all. So good to test and try. Okay, one thing I wanted to mention, I think you can see up here. Yeah, and so this has to do with a dry and wet technique. And yeah, let me just grab a color. So a lot of times I find that I'll need a sharp edge and a blurred edge. So to do that, I'm going to paint on the sharp edge first, get a semi-damp brush, and then really just run it along one edge of the stroke, and it feathers out pretty nicely. So that's now I'm gonna just kind of continue this. I'm gonna keep lifting a bit and wetting the paper at the same time, so you can get a nice even blend if you want. But you can see we have a really sharp edge and a blended edge. So that's how you do that. Okay, I wanted to go into, so I'm gonna have you do all of these, right? So solid wash, gradient, color to nothing, 2-color gradient. Now I had some backfill on it. It's okay. Wet on wet, dry on wet on dry, and then lifting. So on this half of the page, I'm going to get into different textures. So I'm going to start with, so there's dry brushing. So I have an old credit card here. They might be part of a fast food meal or whatever. But let me see if I can get some paint activated here. And then we can, now this is a dry brush technique. It's really a more of a palette knife technique, right? But done with watercolor, which is kind of cool. And it gives you quite a bit of control, but enough, for me at least, enough variety where I go, oh, that was pretty exciting. Okay, so there is, I mean, I'm calling this dry brush, but I'm using kind of like a palette knife on it. Another kind of dry brush technique is just using a brush. And just wanted to show a couple of different, so you could go on the side of it. So let me mention this, is that if you wanted to really make it a dry brush, like I picked up a lot of pigment here, and let's say I have a lot of water in my brush, I can put my towel next to my brush and pull out water out of the brush, so when I paint with it, it's not sopping. It's not like it's going everywhere. And I can get a dry brush happening. Okay, and the drier you get, the you know, you can get a really kind of a rough texture going on. And that will change from brush to brush. Like if I use my flat and do that, I'm going to get something different. So when you do these, I would ask you also to label them. So this one is dry brush. It's actually palette knife / dry brush, and then label all these. The next one that I wanted to show was, and this is really nice for like clouds or, you know, things like that, where you need a really okay. So I'm just throwing down a flat wash over this whole thing. And then I'm going to come in while it's really wet and now this isn't, I mean, we could use it as clouds here, but it doesn't, there's like other uses, right? Get a big area up here, but it just like sucks it up and almost looks like it's lifted, right? And we could go in and sharpen some edges a bit here and there. A little more pigment and stuff. And could go back in with a sponge here and there, but so this is a tissue, which is, and I'll label that so we can keep that in mind so we know what's what. Tissue. I'll scrub a little bit so you can kind of see what happens with that. But yeah, if that I'm just kind of letting you know some techniques. So when, so if you will go, oh, you know what, I love that color pencil, I might go get a couple of pencils and you can try it out. All right. Okay, so this is a tissue. I'm going to do sponging. I kind of jumped right over sponging. So let me do a bit of that. I'm going to put a base color down here. Okay, so I'm probably going to wait on that and let it dry. Let's see if there's anything else I need to wait on. Oh yeah, well that's a good one too. Let's do that. So I'll do some sponging on the top of this, but on the bottom of it, I'm going to do some inscribing. So if you have a sharpened twig would work great. The end of a brush, or a pen that is not working anymore, like a ballpoint pen. So what this is doing is making impressions in the paper, and then the paint is going to flow into those impressions. And kind of make marks. So, and we can put one more little wash over this so we can maybe actually see a little bit stronger what's happening. Because yellow wasn't the best move, but that's okay. I think you'll get the idea. Let's see. Now, I'm going to start on the next one too, and up here, once this dries, then we'll go to the sponge. So this one I want to do sprays. So let me get a decent color here. Okay, and I'm going to just do a full, wash this full page, this full square. So we can do some different sprays on this while it's wet. I have water. There's also alcohol spray that I may have to rummage for, but I'm just gonna let me shield this a little bit. There's a paper that I've cut out here. So I'm going to try to keep my water spray on the right. Okay. And you can kind of see what happens there. And then I can find my alcohol spray. Okay. So alcohol on the right, and then water on the left, and we can maybe let's see. Alcohol again. And then maybe before that. Okay, it can look better than that. Let me move into the sponge a bit because I feel like that's pretty interesting. Let's see. So what I'm going to do is activate some paint over here and get it on my sponge. And it's kind of a dry sponge. Actually, I'm just going to wet it and get a little bit more, and then we'll just kind of hit this. And I might put a little shield over it so it'll kind of protect Okay. And I mean, this does get some really pretty amazing textures. And you can keep building them. And that's really watercolor's thing, is building, 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 building. Okay. Try that. So really nice, you don't want to overdo it, but you put a different sponge in there and you can get some different, so these are like sea sponges that you can get at like art stores and things, or like even in like beauty products. Where am I going to put this? I'll just put it right down here. So this is a little bit bigger, a little bolder. Okay. All right. Hopefully you get the idea of those sponges. Let's see. I guess I wanted to do two things on this one, and one is I'm going to start with a resist marker, and what that, if you're not familiar, you can use the stuff called masking material, and it's essentially just a different way to keep watercolor from touching your page in a certain spot. So this is one. This is a Molotow brand, and so you have to, this one you have to pump a little bit until that material gets down into the tube. Now this one's a little old. I just had it sitting around. I don't use this all that much. Oh, here it comes. Okay. So what the deal is with this is this, you draw it on and then you can brush it off or use a kneaded eraser to get it off after you paint on it. So let's say we paint some little outbuildings, or even like some flowers, right? Or just some dots. Maybe we'll just do dots. So again, this is a Molotow. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. It's a 2.0. And a lot of times this masking is really goofy to put on. So a little pen is really wonderful. Okay, so what I wanted to do was to show, and I'm still going to show results of this, but it's just not fully dry. And doing a hair dryer on this stuff will guarantee that it doesn't come up. So I'm waiting on that. Meanwhile, I wanted to show a couple other techniques. One is called a wax resist. And I don't have crayons around my house, but I do have a candle. So I'm just gonna do some marks here, and you can do this resist after one wash, so you'll see the first wash's color through. I'm just doing it on paper for speed and convenience. So yeah, so we'll put a wash on this. Yeah, we'll just do a gray. Now, obviously, the water is not going to penetrate the wax that well. And I put, anyway, I put some wax on it, not a ton, I guess. But it really is hard to see where you're putting it, to be honest. So I'm going to do another wash up here, and this one is going to be salt. And I've brought a few different types of salt. I'm going to go do a dark Payne's Gray to get, so we can kind of see what's going on here. And I think less of a juicy wash on this would be probably best, because well, I guess again, excuse me, again, I think it depends on the paper and the actual color as far as how much it will dye things, and its strength, you know, strength of the. So let me go over my salts real quick so you know what I'm dealing with. So this first one is a sea salt. It's a coarse sea salt, so kind of like a rock salt. I'm going to get a little in my hand and show you. So they're not terribly big, but they're good size. So I'm going to put that in the top half, or top third. We'll see what happens on that. And these you just let dry. And these are quite wet, so I might wait just a little bit on this. Okay, so that's version 1. I need to put this salt somewhere. Okay. Okay, so next is regular table salt. I'm going to put a lot and then just a few, just to see what we get. And this last one is called a kosher salt, coarse kosher salt. And this is a little bit kind of flaky, so it's like right between the coarse and the table. It's coming out a lot coarser than, yeah, but it just kind of varies a little bit. So we'll see how those turn out, and I will get back to you. You can take a look. Okay, so I thought things were dry, so I was ready to move forward, so I brushed the salt off, but there's some areas where the watercolor wasn't dry, and so I took this off prematurely, and here and here. But you can see this coarse salt. Maybe it's better if I go up close. The coarse salt has large kind of areas. The table salt has a bunch of small ones, and then this kosher salt just really didn't get a chance, but it's basically the table salt. Anyway, so that's how that turned out. Interesting technique. Still need to pull off this, and I guess I'm waiting to show you because it doesn't always work for me, but we can try it and see. Here, maybe I have the right eraser for it. I don't know. I usually get a gray needed, but this one's a little different. It's a white needed, and I'm just pulling off this. This is the Molotov. I never got that other Holbein, the very narrow Holbein to work. So, and I'm going different directions here to get it off, which seems to be working okay. But it's not terribly easy to get it off. It really doesn't want to come, to be honest. And I can see the watercolor like lightning, getting lighter. And sorry if this is shaking the camera. But yeah, I think because I'm having to scrub so much that the actual watercolor is lightening up a bit. And yeah, that's it. That's it there. Turned out pretty nice. I think it's probably a successful test. Anyway, that's kind of what that does. I like this scratchy one. This is okay, but that scratchy one's kind of cool. All right, so the assignment here is to do, and check the project sheet, but a solid wash, a gradient between two colors, wet on wet, wet on dry, lifting, and then like six different, what do we call these, textures, I guess? Yeah, 6 different textures. Okay, so there we go. Hopefully that gives you some insight into a little bit more in depth into watercolor. And okay, so over and out. Excited to see your stuff.